Hey guys, welcome back to the BMG Loft. And today we are going to be starting a new series actually called Mix Tip Mondays. And today I wanted to talk about um, maybe you have a small room that you can record in, and maybe you do have a drum set and you have enough channels, but you don't necessarily have a large room, or you just have designed your drum room to be more of a dry, tight, smaller space with a lot of isolation, which there's plenty of studios like that and have gotten great sounds. And today I have a drum set from a professional studio that is a smaller drum room that's pretty dead, so you get a really tight, close sound. And maybe you're needing something larger sounding, but this is what you have to work with, and I'm going to go over what I did to achieve a much larger sound with what I had. And basically, the setup was a kick mic in, snare top, uh, two toms with close mics, and two overheads, and a hi hat mic. And it was again recorded in a smaller room, um, dead, pretty dead, pretty tight, and the song was needing a little bit bigger, sounding more drum room type with high ceilings kind of sound. And we're gonna go over today how I achieved that. And one of the first things you'll notice is I'm not afraid to use technology and plugins, and I do whatever the track calls for. And one of the first things, well, here, let me get into Pro Tools here real quick. You'll notice that I clean up the tracks. A lot of this was used with Drumatom to get rid of excess bleed within the close mics, because that within itself will allow a much tighter sound, especially when you start panning things into the spectrum. It just creates an overall clear tightness if you don't have a lot of hi-hat in the snare. Um, with the toms, excess ring from the toms themselves. And typically I'll manually take a lot of that stuff out, especially with the toms and with the kick. But the snare I usually use drum a tom because it does a really good job at naturally taking it. It's not a gate. However the technology works, it literally removes the bleed that is separated from the snare, and you get the pure tone of the snare, and nothing like a gate at all. It's literally not a gate. A lot of people get I've seen people comment on videos about the drum tom saying, why don't you just use a gate? It does the same thing. No, it doesn't. With a gate, you may have a lot of hi-hat hitting when you actually hit the snare, that a gate can't remove that. The gate literally can't remove that. So when the gate opens on that snare hit, you may still have a lot of hi-hat bleed on that hit. And with this, I mean, it literally removes it from that, but you still get the pure tone, the full transient, the whole hit of the snare. So that's why I prefer that method, and it works really good for the hi-hats. They have a good hi-hat algorithm. So that's the first thing, is I like to clean up the tracks, remove as much bleed as I can. And now it does depend too on, first off, it depends on the quality of the kit, the quality of the room, and how you're able to capture it, and it depends on the style of music. Not everything, jazz is very open. You depend on the room, you depend on the tones from all the mics, and that's a little bit different. But in especially today's modern music and progressive music, you want to try to isolate and eliminate as much of it as you can to get that tight, cohesive sound when you're just really getting after it. Excuse me. So the next thing I do is, luckily I have a plugin for this, but sometimes I still go in and manually check anyways, is making sure everything is phase aligned to the overheads. And I like to use one of the channels and get the other overhead channel to match that, and then rely on one to make sure everything else is phase and time aligned. And what I mean by that is, like, if we take a snare hit here and we zoom in, we make it bigger, comparing it to the overhead channel to make sure that the polarity is the same and that it is moved into time with it time aligned, so the phase cohesion is perfect, so you get the fullest, cleanest, purest sound, and there's no comb filtering, anything like that. As you can see, this isn't aligned manually, but I'm relying on auto align from Sound Radix, and it's absolutely incredible. It's an incredible time saver. And as you can see here, it's flipping the phase and moving at 142 samples that way, which makes it perfectly in phase from a polarity perspective and from a time alignment perspective. So the first two things I do is clean the tracks, get everything as tight as I can, and make sure all the phase from every angle is covered. And that alone will get you, first off, a better sound. It may not get you a big, well, it can give you a bigger sound. It's going to give you a fuller sound. Your snare is going to sound full. Your kick's going to be tight and punchy. That right out of the gate is going to help a ton. But your best friend for getting, well, first off, let's do this. We're going to play, I'm just going to loop a chorus, and I'm going to play it with the band mix that's going on here, and I'm going to go ahead and deactivate all the processing, and I'm going to turn off the trigger channels because you'll just hear a multiple of the original. So we don't need that. I'm going to mute this, and we'll play it through, and then I'll activate it and play it through again, and then we'll talk about some of the stuff. Okay, now I'm going to just I'm going to solo the drums, and we'll listen to it this way, and then we'll do the same thing with it activated. Okay, now let's turn everything on. And here it comes. Let's get the triggers back on. And let's take a listen with everything activated. Okay, sorry, your computer gets slow at the most inopportune times, so of course it would now. It's never a problem, but today it will be, because that's just how computers work. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. Let me turn off the group, and we are going to, first off, I'm going to solo the overhead so you can hear what kind of room we were working with. You'll hear that it's not the biggest sound. It's dry. It's very tight. And let's see. Let's do this. We'll deactivate everything on these two channels, so you just hear how it was initially recorded. Okay, now let's bring in everything so you can hear what I did to at least get the most out of what we were working with. So, with this, basically, I'm just trying to make sure that it's even. We're using, well, first, again, it was aligned with auto align, make sure the phase was tight between everything. And I am running the Slate Monster in parallel here, squashing it, hitting it hard to get it nice and even. Try to bring up a little bit more ambience out of it, and uh, level off everything too as well, but also blend it back in and mix it in with the original so it doesn't just sound super squashed. And when you squash it real hard, and it's great for effect, especially on big room mics. But on the overheads, it's nice to not let the cymbals get so compressed and it starts to sound funky and weird. And so we're blending that, but before that, we're taking out some of the room tone. There's a notch here at 126 hertz where it gets really woofy and puffy from that kick being in the small room, and then overall low shelf, cutting out some of the lower mud going on, and then up around the 500 hertz range, pulling out some of the mud from the snare to make it sound a little bit cleaner and tighter. And then other than that, I love using tape head to kind of smooth the top end of the cymbals off on really hard hits. It can really push those back in the mix if they're really jumping out without having to use compression. It acts kind of like a compression, natural compression, like tape would when it saturates. And it works really well, very natural sounding, and it just pushes it right back in the mix, right where you want it, so it doesn't cut somebody's head off on some of those really hard crash hits. Uh, and then everything's going through the Slate virtual channel. I love the API for drums, so that's what it's going through on here. But here is the key to getting that bigger sound from the rest of the kit, and it involves using trigger. I mean, lots of people have done this, but there's lots of different ways you can use trigger. Maybe you need a better close mic sound, whatever the case may be, but it rocks for if you can. In this case, I'm using the Blackbird samples on a snare that just sounds awesome, and you want to blend it in to make it feel like it's a big sounding kit, but not unnatural. So what I'm going to do is we'll solo overheads with the original snare in, and then I'll blend in. Oh, I'll bring it in. I'll just solo it where it's at now, where it's blended, and just listen to how it comes alive. It sounds natural. It makes the kit sound much bigger, much bigger. So as you can hear, it really just comes alive, sounds natural. Um, Tips that I have is try to find a snare that has a similar type tone to what you're using. You can blend snares if you want, and you can achieve great things. But if you're wanting the most natural sound, I mean, it's just common sense. Try to find something that's kind of in the same vein of as what you used. Um, and just just mess with it, man. But this can really open up drum tracks that you have small room issues with. And I like to do the same thing with the toms. I'll find toms that are similar in tone, and I will use the room mic versions of them and blend them in with the original toms, so it starts sounding like everything was coming through like a great set of room mics in a big room. And let's see, let's find where several, well, here's a little tom breakdown thing going on. We'll do the same thing. I will solo the overheads with the original mics and bring in the trigger mics. And as you can hear, it just makes it sound like it just comes alive, like it was recorded in a huge room, which those samples were the ones I'm blending in. And in this case, it is again from the Blackbird expansion from Slate, and it's the room mic, and just blending that in. And also another thing is make sure you pan it to whichever tom you're matching. Like for this is tom 1, I have it panned here on the original microphone. Make sure it matches so everything's matching in the stereo spectrum. And another thing with trigger is make sure that the phase is correct with the original once you blend them together. And what I do is copy over my auto align so it matches, and then I just have to make sure the polarity is the same, and usually it is, but I've seen people run into that issue, and I'm like, man, did you check the phase? And like, oh, I didn't even think about that, because you're not thinking about it when you're inside a plugin, finding samples and stuff like that. You don't always think about that, but yeah, definitely do that. Um, but yeah, this is the simplest way to get a huge drum sound, and just to keep it natural, make sure it matches, make sure it's similar in tone, make sure they're panned whatever it is you're uh, blending in with it is panned the same in the stereo spectrum, and it'll really make those uh, uh, the kit come alive. So, excuse me. In review, uh, clean the tracks up that you have. Make sure you remove excess bleed. Again, as long as it's appropriate for the style of music. I'm really focusing more on of what today's stuff is with just heavy, lots of toms, lots of cymbal stuff, and there's just excess bleed, and it can really, I mean, just mud up and cloud up your mix big time and throw the whole stereo spectrum off. So work on that. Make sure everything's phase aligned to your overheads. Make sure you line one up with the other, and from left to right, and then use one of those channels designated to lock everything else into that phase. And that alone will be huge. And then start messing with your samples of blending in room mics, other overheads. Find a tone that works for you and run with it. But a little goes a long way. Don't overdo it. And in more videos we'll discuss deeper if you want on how the tone of the kick drum or whatever. But today's focus is I just wanted to shed some light on how you can get a huge drum sound if you have limited space, but you do have a kit or you have the inputs available to track it, and you want to get as big of a drum sound as you possibly can. So hopefully this has helped. I'm looking forward to this Monday Mix Tip series. So if you guys have anything you want me to cover, please comment below and let me know. If you like this, please like, share, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And until next time, guys, keep it grooving.